Good evening and welcome to Women Aware's panel presentation on rights and resources for victims of crime in Middlesex County. Thank you all for joining us. This program is made possible thanks to a Community Awareness Project grant to Women Aware from the Office for Victims of Crime in recognition of National Crime Victims' Rights Week. My name is Susan Dykeman, and I'm the Development Director for Women Aware, and I'll be moderating tonight's presentation. It is my honor to introduce our panelists and invite them to tell a little bit about their work as we get started. So let's begin with First Assistant Prosecutor Christopher Kuberwright from the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office.
Good evening, Ms. Dykeman, and good evening to all of our other panelists. In addition, on behalf of Prosecutor Ciccone, I'd like to wish a good evening to all of the members of the community and survivors of domestic violence and other violent crimes who have joined us this evening for this special event. We gather virtually in recognition of the National Crime Victims' Rights Week. More importantly, we gather to discuss the rights and resources for victims of crime in Middlesex County and even wider in the state of New Jersey. As Ms. Dykeman indicated, my name is Christopher Kuberwright. After serving as a law clerk, I have been an assistant prosecutor since September of 1990. Today, I serve as the first assistant prosecutor at the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. I have prosecuted nearly every offense in our criminal code, and I take great pride and pleasure in being called a victim rights advocate. No one who has been a victim of a violent crime or domestic violence has asked to be thrusted into the criminal justice system. But when they are thrusted into the system, we all must assist in navigating through the process. And that's the beauty of tonight's presentation of all the panelists that work closely together to provide resources to survivors and victims. I thank you for having me, and I look forward to the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Mr. Kuberwright. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Support Staff Manager Diane Johnson from the Prosecutor's Office Victim Witness Unit. But before I let Diane speak, I want to offer special congratulations as she was recently selected by the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General as a recipient of the Endurance Award, which is one of the Office of the Attorney General's excellent awards for victims' justice. So congratulations, Diane. You want to just unmute, Diane?
Sure.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Susan. That was a surprise to me. So thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I am Diane Johnson, the Victim Witness Coordinator for the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office. And I've been a victim advocate for over 25 years here at the Prosecutor's Office. I supervise a staff of 11 advocates, and we are here to assist crime victims, survivors, and their families as their case moves through the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, it is very, very overwhelming. And as First Assistant Prosecutor Kuberwright indicated, people are thrust into a system and they don't ask to be in the system. So we are here to do what we can to minimize the trauma and to assist with resources for those that need it.
Thank you. Next, we have Attorney Dalia Youssef from Central Jersey Legal Services.
Thank you, Ms. Dykeman, and good evening to everybody and all of the panelists and our participants in today's Zoom panel. I'm honored to be part of this group. As stated, my name is Dalia Youssef. I am a senior staff attorney at Central Jersey Legal Services in the matrimonial unit. I've been doing matrimonial law for almost 20 years now, so it's been quite some time in that field. And my current primary position is to represent victims of domestic violence. So I'm very familiar with this particular area, and our representation at Legal Services is to help out in a wide array of services, which we will cover later. But the most important thing is to really bring compassion and understanding for our victims. Part of our advocacy is really standing shoulder to shoulder with our victims and representing them in a way that, regardless of the outcome of the legal issue, that they walk out feeling that they were treated with compassion and kindness, and somebody was listening to the needs that they have.
Thank you, Ms. Youssef. Next, Lieutenant Leanne Solomons from the Monroe Township Police Department.
Thank you, Ms. Dykeman. As she said, my name is Lieutenant Leanne Solomons. I'm honored to be here tonight, and I'm honored to represent the Monroe Township Police Department. I have worked there for more than 20 years, and I'm currently assigned to the Patrol Division, where I'm a liaison to the Domestic Violence Response Team. We are a municipal police department in Middlesex County, so our officers respond to your calls from 911 and our non-emergency number. We are the people you see in the patrol vehicles around town, and we are usually your first encounter with the criminal justice system, which I know can be a very stressful experience. So I'm here tonight, hopefully to answer your questions and ease your concerns regarding interactions with the police.
Thank you, Lieutenant Solomons. Next, Mildred Torres, Director of the Middlesex County Family Justice Center.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for being on the panel. I too am honored to be on and to provide information, valuable information to the community. As you stated, Sue, I am Mildred Torres. I'm the Director of the Family Justice Center. Women Aware is the lead domestic violence agency of the Middlesex County. For over 40 years, we have provided comprehensive domestic violence services to victims and their children. We have a dedicated staff that is multicultural and multilingual and committed to moving victims beyond abuse. As we move along tonight's program, I will provide you with detailed information about services. Thank you, and we'll talk further down the road.
Thank you. I also would like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Catherine Cintron, Grants and Compliance Coordinator at Women Aware, and she will be assisting tonight in monitoring any questions or comments in the chat. So thank you all for making time to join us tonight. On behalf of Women Aware, I also want to extend a thank you to the survivors that we spoke with in preparation for this program, because they shared their own questions as victims of crime to guide our panelists tonight in providing the most useful information. So that is much appreciated. If you have a general question about crime victims' rights and resources that you would like to bring to the panel's attention, please type it in the chat box. If time permits, we will do our best to bring it to their attention later in the program. And panelists, as we go through the questions, please give me the high sign if you would like to weigh in on one of your fellow panelists' comments on a particular topic. You are more than welcome to. So to start the conversation, Mr. Kuberwright, you are up. Could you share a bit about how the Prosecutor's Office serves victims of crime?
Well, first and foremost, we work with each and every member of this panel. We work with local law enforcement. We work with advocacy groups, and we work with attorneys that are representing survivors in the family court. We try to get them the discovery that they need to prosecute their cases in the family court. We try to be a buffer between their advocates and any hurdle that they find in the system, be it local law enforcement or be it really any hurdle whatsoever. We try to be that buffer. In addition, local law enforcement will take phone calls in the beginning until such time as the case is referred to the prosecutor's office. Then if the offender is incarcerated, there will be an initial appearance and you will be contacted by a victim witness advocate who ask you a little bit about the case, who ask you what you're looking for, if you're in fear about the case, and how you would like to see the case resolved. Thereafter, we represent your interest throughout the process. If it goes to the family court, we have an assistant prosecutor that handles specifically violations of domestic violence restraining orders. We have an assistant prosecutor in the superior court, the criminal part, that deals with nothing but indictable domestic violence cases. And more importantly, we have, I know I'm going to get beat up, but we're going to have a staff of, I don't know, 8 or so advocates that are there on a daily basis to take phone calls from victims, to answer questions, to refer them to resources, and to get them the assistance that they need. In addition, those victim rights advocates will then make referrals to the assistant prosecutor so that our survivors know what's going on each and every step of the way.
Thank you. Maybe to expand on that a little bit, Ms. Johnson, could you talk a little bit about who a victim, if they are part of the criminal court process based on their experience, who do they contact to help them understand, for support?
Sure, of course. Any victim survivor and their family may contact the Victim Witness Advocacy Unit, and I can give that number now. It's 732-745-3394, and someone will assist the survivor, the victim that is calling, and put them in contact with their victim advocate that is going to be assigned to their case and will follow it through all the way to criminal disposition. In addition, if they need to contact anybody other than the Victim Advocacy Unit, they can also contact the main prosecutor number at 732-745-3300. And someone will assist them, whether it be for a prosecutor, an investigator, or obviously victim advocacy.
Thank you.
And Sue, just to follow up, we do have the brochure that I think would be very, very helpful to all of the survivors and victims. It provides the numbers that Ms. Johnson just talked about. And quite frankly, it supplies countless numbers of resources and the rights that victims have when being thrust into the criminal justice system. And I know that you made it available to our participants, and they can download that and speak more in depth with a victim advocate.
Absolutely. That resource and a lot of other resources are available at Women Aware's website, which is womenaware.net/news. A lot of good information there. We're going to stick with the prosecutor's office team for a little bit. One victim asked about a repeat offender. Why is a repeat offender sometimes allowed to bail out quickly, repeatedly? And how does a victim get the information he or she needs to stay safe when that happens?
Well, as far as staying safe, I would recommend to all victims/survivors to take advantage of the orders that are put in place, the orders of protection. They are orders of the court. They apply to both the offender and most times the survivors as well, to have no contact. So take advantage of those court orders. In addition, see the resources, utilize the panelists that are here to obtain resources to assist the survivor as well as their family members. And as far as the question about bailing out, that is something that we see all too often in the state of New Jersey with multiple acts and pieces of legislation. Back in January 1 of 2017, the legislature enacted the Criminal Justice Reform Act, which essentially did away with bail. I can't imagine anyone in the workhouse, probably about a half a dozen cases that actually have a bail on their case. Most offenders will come before the court, and the court will conduct an analysis based upon an algorithm, better known as a public safety assessment. And then the judge will make an analysis. But unfortunately, there is a presumption in favor of release. And that's why it's very important to respect the court orders and to take notes of calls, violations, driving by the house, mail, any of those things, so that they can be reported back to the judge, and the judge can take action, unfortunately, the next time around.
Thank you. And then another victim posed a question, very worried, obviously, about protecting her child and worried about the violence that he's witnessed. Could you share a little bit about what protocols the prosecutor's office follows when it comes to protecting children?
Well, that's a great question. And more importantly, It's not even the prosecutor's office, it is statewide. On October the 6th, 2020, our Attorney General issued a directive announcing the Handle with Care program. It became effective on December 31st, 2020, and every single law enforcement officer in the state was required to submit and listen to a robust, probably in excess of a 3-hour training to deal with young people who are experiencing ACEs, adolescent, childhood experiences, and so that they can deal with those. And that thereafter, the law enforcement officers are, adverse childhood experiences. And then what happens is that law enforcement is supposed to notify the school district where, that child has experienced a traumatic event the night before, and not to compound the event by, giving the child a 0, making them take a test, and allowing them to refer them to a counselor while in the institution, that is the school. And more importantly, to be kind when it comes to missing homework, testing, and things of that nature. I do believe that the directive does not go far enough. It doesn't indicate to educators that what is the nature of the event. And that's my own personal opinion, not as a first assistant. So there is the Handle with Care. I know I've provided that information. So I think our survivors can't see that as an invasion when the district does know that their child conceivably was present. In addition, you have many of these panelists that can provide services. In addition, Diane Johnson and her staff are outstanding in connecting young people with services to deal with the ACEs that children have experienced.
Thank you. Our next couple questions are for Lieutenant Solomons. So Lieutenant, one question that's come up a lot, probably everywhere over the past year and change, is how are you responding to victims' calls during COVID-19?
Yes, we are aware that during this pandemic, people are very concerned about exposure. Our officers are responding to all calls for service, and our lobby is open for walk-in reports. But because of that concern over exposure, our officers are wearing masks and utilizing personal protective equipment when they interact with people. They're also cleaning and disinfecting our building and all of our equipment. If we go for a call for service, we will provide you with a mask if you don't have access to one. Sometimes to lessen exposure, if we're in a small area, we may ask people to step outside to allow for a larger area. But we are still providing the same full police services that we provided before COVID. Although for a period of time, our domestic violence response team members were not able to respond to our building and provide in-service or in-person service, we were connecting victims with the Women Aware hotline. Our domestic violence response team members are responding now, but if you are still concerned about exposure, we can connect you directly to the Women Aware hotline. We are taking reports, making mandatory arrests, and assisting with the issuance, service, and enforcement of temporary restraining orders and final restraining orders.
Thank you. To follow up on that, what kind of information should a victim be prepared to provide to the police when registering a complaint?
Well, prior to the police even arriving, the dispatcher is going to ask them several questions. They're going to ask if the parties involved are separated. They're going to ask if there are any weapons there. They're also going to ask if you're injured in order to, if you need get an ambulance responding along with the police officers. When the officers arrive on scene, they'll want to know where everyone is. They're going to ask you if there were any weapons involved in the incident, and also if there are any weapons in the home or owned by the involved parties, even if the weapons were not involved in the incident. Officers are going to want to know if you suffered any injuries, and they are going to ask you to show them those injuries. They'll ask you exactly what happened, who, what, where, when, how. They'll need to know the relationship between you and the offender. For example, are you married, divorced? Do you reside together? Is this a dating relationship? They will ask if you have any children in common and if the children were involved in the incident. And importantly, they will need to know if there's a history of domestic violence and if there are any temporary or final restraining orders in place. They may ask you more questions, but their goal is to try to assist you and make sure that everyone is safe.
Thank you. Earlier in your comments, you mentioned mandatory arrest. Could you tell us the difference between mandatory arrest and a voluntary complaint?
Yes. In certain circumstances, a police officer is required by law to make an arrest. Those circumstances are if the victim exhibits signs of physical or internal injury caused by the act of domestic violence, or if there's probable cause to believe that a temporary or final restraining order was violated and that the person had been previously served with that temporary or final restraining order, or if there's a warrant in effect, or if there's probable cause to believe that a weapon was used in the act of domestic violence. In all of those cases, the officer is required to make an immediate arrest. In other cases, though, the officer is not required to make an arrest, but may do so if there is probable cause. If the mandatory arrest is not made, then the victim has the ability to make what you would describe as a voluntary complaint. They can sign complaints, or they can decide they don't want to sign complaints at that time. They just want the incident documented. But regardless of whether there's a mandatory arrest or maybe a complaint to be signed in the future, the officers on scene will provide you access to request a temporary restraining order, to speak to a counselor through our domestic violence response team or Women Aware's hotline. We'll provide you access to victim and witness services, and we'll explain the complaint signing process to you and provide you with the paperwork you need to complete that process if you decide to do that in the future.
Okay, thank you. And one last question for now. Could you explain for us what a well check is?
A well check, sometimes called a welfare check, is when someone calls the police department and asks us to check on the well-being of someone. So sometimes it's to check on a person that they haven't heard from in some time. Other times, after a person has an interaction with someone, they develop a concern, and then they will call the police and ask us to check on the individual. In other instances, the call is generated because of recent text messages or social media postings that cause someone to be concerned that another person is in danger. Sometimes we receive welfare checks for children who are in the custody of one parent and may not have returned to the custody of the other parent as expected. When we respond to a welfare check, our goal is to ensure the health and safety of the person involved. If there's a concern for their safety, we will obtain medical or psychological services as needed. And if we become aware of anything else that requires further investigation, such as a crime was committed, we will transition from a welfare check into more of an investigation and make sure that whatever is going on is fully investigated and the people are safe.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we're going to move into some information about legal services for victims of crime. So Ms. Youssef, perhaps you could start by telling us what are the most common legal issues that you find that victims need assistance with?
So Susan, before I answer that question, if you don't mind, I'd like to go just to a comment that Lieutenant Solomon's made, because I want to elaborate before, since we had just talked about it. She made a comment about the prior history, that in answering one of the questions, when a victim calls the police, what they need to address. And it's very important what she mentioned, the prior history. So I just wanted to add to that. From an attorney perspective, from when we go to court, when we're dealing with temporary restraining orders, that box, prior history, that question is very important. So I really want to encourage the victims and to answer that question as best as they possibly can. And there's often a misunderstanding that prior history only requires prior legal action that happened between the parties. This question is a broad question and can include prior legal actions, temporary restraining orders, final restraining orders, complaints to the police, but it can also include unreported prior history that occurred of domestic violence between the parties. That is critical to a judge's determination about whether or not to issue a final restraining order, to show that the current incident is not an isolated incident, that there's a history of domestic violence, whether it be harassment, whether it be assault, whether it be threats that occurred in the relationship. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is when you're asked about prior history to really answer that question as best as you can, as far back as you need to. That prior history can be something that happened 10 years back. It doesn't have to be just what happened this year. It can include last year, all the prior years as best as the victim can remember and recall. We often, as attorneys, have to amend and modify a temporary restraining order to include prior history that was left out. And I just wanted to kind of emphasize that point because it is such a crucial question and I think it gets overlooked very often.
Just to follow up, and I apologize, Ms. Youssef,
Sure.
your point is well taken, and sometimes under the circumstances, a survivor is dealing with the incident at hand and just doesn't recall due to the trauma the previous incidents. That's why it's vitally important when a victim witness advocate reaches out and you explain to them that this has been an ongoing situation, and more importantly, a detective will then reach out to attempt to document that so that your job is a little bit easier.
Thank you. So
Thank you both.
to my question, right, was about the types of legal services and assistance that a victim or a survivor might need.
Right.
And I really like the term survivor because, you know, that is so important. And part of being a survivor is being able to address all of their needs. One, from my perspective, in trying to get them a final restraining order, if that's what they need. But in addition, making sure that their financial needs are met, getting them child support, spousal support if they are a spouse, making sure if they are dealing with housing issues, giving them assistance on housing issues, giving them assistance on immigration issues, helping them with social services agencies, getting them assistance regarding cash for paying for food, or getting them items that they need in their home for their children. So that's the good thing about Central Jersey Legal Services and other legal services agencies, is that we have various departments. So although I work in the family unit, we have attorneys in other units as well. We have housing unit, we have a consumer unit, we have an immigration unit. So we can address those multiple issues that come up for survivors of domestic violence, because if you're not going to address all of those aspects, oftentimes it becomes very hard for them to walk out of an abusive situation because they're tied to their abuser financially, or because they need housing. It might be his apartment that they live at, or maybe he's the one that's paying for the rent and they don't know where else they're going to go. So we have to make sure that we're addressing all of those issues to really help them be survivors.
Thank you. You mentioned that you have a group dedicated to immigration. So that's a question that came up. Victims said, you know, is afraid to ask for help because I am undocumented. So who is it safe to call for help if a victim of crime is undocumented?
Well, it's definitely safe for them to call legal services. We serve that group. We will protect you from that. We're not going to report the victim. In fact, we try to help them see if we can deal with their immigration issues as well and get them legal status. But even if we can't work on the immigration part of it, they're safe by calling us. They're not going to get themselves in any trouble by reaching out to us. They're still eligible for our services, regardless of if they're a citizen or not. As victims of domestic violence, we don't require that of them. So we're not going to ask them to provide that documentation, and they're definitely safe calling our office. But I think what another part of this question is very important, and if the lieutenant doesn't mind answering that as well, I think people are often concerned about contacting the police for that very same reason.
Right.
If they call, will that get them into trouble? And if she doesn't mind answering that.
Thank you.
We respond to everyone's request for service, regardless of your immigration status. And that is not a question we are going to ask you when we come to your home. Our concern is investigating your incident, your domestic violence incident, and making sure that you receive the services. And if somebody has a mandatory arrest situation, your immigration status has no impact on us making that decision to arrest the offender or to help you in obtaining a temporary restraining order. That does not impact our decision. We will always come to help you.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, Ms. Dykeman, there is, and maybe I was remiss in not providing it to your panel, but there is also a directive regarding establishing trust between law enforcement and immigrant populations and undocumented populations. So I will try to get that document over to you. And in addition, I do get applications on a regular basis for U visa applications, which facilitates the process to have somebody stay in the country for at least a limited period of time while giving Ms. Youssef and Ms. Torres time to work other avenues of the system.
Thank you.
And we work on doing that too, for helping them fill out the applications for the U visa, getting their paperwork together that they would need to submit for a U visa. And again, that you don't necessarily, the victim doesn't necessarily have to have a final restraining order to be eligible for that U visa. By being a victim of a violent crime or a witness in a case, all of those things make them eligible for having a U visa. So there's times where we can't get a final restraining order for some reason or another, but that doesn't still prohibit them from being able to apply for a U visa. As a victim, filing that police report or contacting our agency sometimes is enough to help us apply for that U visa.
Okay, thank you. Do you ever encounter someone who thinks they may need an attorney because of the situation that they're dealing with as a survivor, but they're concerned that they can't afford an attorney?
Sure. Well, that's definitely the population that we deal with, because at Central Jersey Legal Services or any other legal services agency in New Jersey, our clients come to us because of their lower income bracket. So we service people who are lower income, have lower assets, don't have the ability to afford their own attorney. We have an intake unit that before you get to an attorney or a paralegal, that you'll go through our intake process. They will ask about income, they will ask about assets. And if you're in that group below a certain income or below a certain asset level, then you're going to be eligible for assistance from legal services. So you don't have to worry about paying for our fees. It will be free of charge, our services. We don't charge our clients for any of our services. But what I would like to add is that sometimes, we provide legal assistance to everybody who's eligible, but sometimes that legal assistance is just advice only and not full-blown representation. We have to decide that on a case-by-case basis. On a personal level, I would love to represent everybody that comes to me and that I talk to, but unfortunately we are limited in staff, so we try to do our best that we can and prioritize where we can provide legal representation directly and where we can just give advice only.
Okay, thank you. That's a good distinction to make. Would any other, so this brings to mind the issue of confidentiality for clients. Would anybody else like to comment on that, in terms of your dealings with victims of crime, the confidentiality piece?
Well, so I'm going to touch on that. I was going to touch on that when I was going to give our services, but we are Women Aware is our services are completely free and confidential, meaning anything that a victim relates to us and talks to us about is kept confidential. And they entrust the information to us and we will keep that confidential. The only time that we will relay any information is if they give us permission, if we're working with, let's say, the prosecutor's office or with Central Jersey Legal Services or the police department, and we have to share information to help the victim, and they provide us information or provide a release of information, a signed form, then we will then disclose the information they gave us permission to disclose. But aside from that, everything is confidential. That allows a victim to feel comfortable and at ease to share everything, all the information, all their violence that they've experienced, knowing that they have advocates that are going to be there for them, be non-judgmental, and knowing that we're not going to share this information with anyone.
Okay, thank you.
This
Um,
is Philianta. I'm the CEO for Women Aware, and I just want to ride a little bit on what Mildred shared about confidentiality. There are a couple of exceptions. That is that if a child is being harmed, that's okay. If a child is being harmed or that person is suicidal or homicidal. So just so to keep that in mind, and we let people know up front what the boundaries are to our confidentiality. But
Yes,
we
thank
have
you,
an
Phil.
obligation to protect, especially vulnerable children.
Really, thank you for that. And we do tell the victims immediately up front. It's called duty to warn. So we're all under the duty to warn law, and we explain that. It's one of the first things we explain to victims before we even get into any other details, so they can understand that should they review anything, like Philly said, child abuse, homicide, they're thinking about suicide, they're thinking about homicide, we would have to report that. We're mandated reporters.
Okay, thank you.
Dykeman, if I could also add,
Please.
when you interact with the police department, we will have you fill out a VINE form and take some information related to restraining orders. And there may be addresses or phone numbers for the victim or their family or places they're staying. And that information, there's a whole portion of that form that is confidential that will not be given out to the offender when we fill that out. So the officers will be able to explain that to them if they give us information, because it will allow us to let them know if an offender is released from custody, if they were arrested, without giving that information to the offender.
Okay.
And Susan, I just also want to add upon what everybody else has said in terms of the confidentiality, ensuring the victim survivor the confidentiality. I think it's important to highlight that the partnerships that we have developed here in Middlesex County has allowed for us to communicate without divulging the confidentiality of a victim survivor in obtaining certain services based upon a general scenario, an individual scenario, so that we can gather the support services that we think is important for the victim without having to break that confidentiality. So the panel of people here tonight working together to ensure that the privacy and confidentiality of the victim is of the utmost importance, while still being able to discuss scenarios to better assist and get the proper resources that we all know that we have for each person individually.
And
Thank
just to
you.
follow up on that, that's how I met so many of the panelists, because in addition to being a victim rights advocate, I'm very stingy with discovery because frankly, I don't know who's on the other end of the phone. I get emails, I'll get a phone call, and it's great to meet Ms. Youssef and Ms. Torres. And when I get a phone call, I make a phone call to the local law enforcement agency and say, please get it out, or please get it to me, to make sure that it's in the right hands and confidentiality is not violated. And I have frankly got myself into some trouble in that regard, but I think the confidentiality is so important to make sure that you know who's requesting it and who's receiving it.
Thank you. I think that's important for people to know, and I also to know that this network of service providers in our county are all on the same page with that. Mildred, maybe you could talk a little bit about the services that Women Aware provides at this point.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue. As I mentioned before, we're the Domestic Violence Agency of Middlesex County, and I'm going to give you briefly some information on the main services that we provide. We provide a lot of services, but I'm going to give you the main ones. We have a 24-hour hotline, which we will post and we will put it on the chat as well as the website. This 24-hour hotline provides general DV information to any victim that calls or any family members that calls. So we provide general DV information, crisis support, as well as safety planning and resources, depending on the individual in the case. It is also our point of entry to all other services. So if anyone needs Women Aware, needs the legal advocacy department, the housing navigation, or any departments of Women Aware, they will go through our 24-hour hotline, and then they get channeled into the different programs. We have the emergency shelter, which I like to call the safe house. It provides shelter for victims that are escaping abusive relationships and partners. It gives them a temporary safety place to stay. It's more for imminent danger. So I mean, I'm really proud of and happy that we have that in Middlesex County. We also provide case management while they're there. We provide advocacy for them with the different social services, of course, meals and transportation, just as though there was in their own home. All the services that you would get in your own home, we provide in a safe house. And this is not just typical. When people think of a safe house or an emergency shelter, some of the first images they think of is like a homeless shelter, like the cots, like this, all these beds together in one room. It's far from that. It's a beautiful home, beautiful individual rooms with their own TVs, beautiful, massive kitchen and living room. So it's very comfortable. It's very welcoming for victims and their children. We have different specialized staff that work with the victims, not only with victims, as well as a child advocate that works at the safe house. We have a PALS program, which is for children. It's a trauma reduction program for children that witness or experience DV. And this helps them obviously, because if you don't help children while they're young, this is gonna fester as they get older, and it could, who knows what could happen. But obviously we know that children must be supported and must be helped. And we have trained professionals, clinicians, therapists to work with children. We have support group for victims that consists of a curriculum where it encourages them in different areas, teaches them financial empowerment, also connects them with therapists, with individual therapists, just a different array of curriculum for them. Then we have our legal advocacy program, which is one of our, they're all strong programs, but I have overseen that program for a number of years. And that program connects with the police and the prosecutors. It's advocates working with domestic violence victims through the judicial process, as well as helping them obtain a restraining order, whether it's a temporary restraining order, as well as follow through with the final restraining order, accompany them to court, as well as connect them with attorneys. Central Jersey Legal Services is one of our partners that we connect many of our victims to. We also provide them with legal information options. We provide case management for them, as well as many other services within the legal advocacy program. We also have a Dvrt program that consists of volunteers. God bless their hearts. The volunteers will meet with victims in the police department. It's a one-time crisis intervention. A victim goes to the police department, she's in crisis, I'm sorry, I'm saying she, but it could be he. She or he, a victim could be obviously a woman or a man. We'll go to the police department in crisis, thinking of getting a restraining order, not sure whether to go through with charges or a restraining order, or both or none. And the police departments will reach out to one of the volunteers, and they will come out to the police department and meet with the victim and provide crisis intervention, support, information, explain about the restraining order process. And once they have that meeting, the follow-up will be done by Women Aware. One of our staff members is an administrator. She will get the information and will follow up with calling the victim for follow-up services. We also have our newest program is a housing navigation program that came about because of the COVID pandemic. This program, which is needed so much, and hopefully it will continue for many years on. All for survivors of crime. And when I say crime, it's not only domestic violence, it's also sexual assault or trafficking, just about any other crime, but specifically those three. It provides safe housing options. So it gives them a lot of information as to where they can find different units. So it's a lot of general information about safe housing options, but it also consists of finding them safe relocation and rental system. We also help with financial help to many victims that were affected by COVID-19 and that have to relocate due to danger, due to not being a safe unit anymore, or they lost income and they have to find a unit that might be less expensive than where they're at now. Our housing navigator will assist them and walk them through all the steps of finding a safe and a safe location, and will help with the rental assistance, which is something that we didn't have before, and it's huge. And we've had hundreds of victims take advantage of this. And Catherine is sitting on the panel here, and she's very instrumental in helping with this program. Thank you, Catherine. We also assist with victim-related compensation with this program, with the VCCO, which Diane Johnson's staff also works very closely with this program. And we also do address confidentiality program. That program is throughout all our services. In every program, we assist victims with a program should they need to keep their address confidential. There's a program through the State Department that a victim can utilize, and we will assist them through the process where they can keep their address confidential. So that is in a nutshell, all our services. Should anyone have any specific questions, please feel free to ask me, whether now or later, or on the chat, or later on, or through the 24-hour hotline. Please follow up any questions you may have. Please call me. We're here to help. Thank you.
Ms. Torres, I think you missed one service. And I think Lieutenant Solomon's will back me up, that police officers are human beings first. They try their very best to get things right. It doesn't always happen, but you and your group and your agency will somehow find my cell phone number on a weekend, and you will make that phone call to make sure things do go right. And that if something was a little amiss, you make sure it goes right. And I think that, frankly, is one of your biggest assets, that you have the collaboration, you have the partnership, and you have the ability to make that phone call.
And I have to say, I am very appreciative of that. And Mr. Kuberwright is right. And it's happened a couple of times where I have called him and he's jumped right in, taken over, and his action has produced wonderful results for our victims. So I thank you and the whole prosecutor's office and staff and the police department. And you're right, we're all human beings. We're all working together to provide the best service possible for victims of domestic violence and all victims of crime. So I thank you so much, Mr. Kuberwright, for our wonderful and strong partnership, and everyone else on the panel. And we're going to continue expanding and growing this partnership so we are the best service providers of the state, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you so much all.
In addition to that last resource that you failed to mention, you mentioned about 20. Do folks have to go to various different offices to get that accomplished, or is it a one-stop shop?
Thank you very much. We are in the initial stages of a family justice center here in Middlesex County. We're going to have a lot of information moving along later on, but as for now, we have started a family justice center, again, initial stages. It is a one-stop center where we have different partners working with us in the same location. As I'm sitting here in my office, to the left are assistant prosecutors, and to my right are victim advocacy advocates as well as Diane Johnson's office. Just think of that, just that itself. Imagine the assistance of a victim walking through the door, having criminal charges against the abuser defendant, as well as a restraining order. Think about everyone working together, assisting this victim. We're also going to have Central Jersey Legal Services, Partners for Women in Justice, many other immigration attorney through the Central Jersey Legal Services, as well as police officers can come in and work with victims. We had this past week, detectives interview a victim of domestic violence in our conference room, working together. Again, it is all the service providers and law enforcement and the prosecutor's office working together to give the best service to this victim. And I think it's fabulous, and it's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. And touch base with us in another 6 months, and you're going to see even more wonderful things. Thank you, Mr. Kuberwright.
Thank you very much. I feel like this conversation could definitely keep going on. However, we are coming to the conclusion of our program. We've got a couple more minutes, and I just want to give all of the panelists an opportunity to share some final thoughts. But just a reminder, many of the resources that have been shared tonight and some additional ones, lots of good information are available on our resource page, and that is on Women Aware's website, which is womenaware.net/news. And that's where you'll find links to all kinds of good information that could be very helpful. So at this point, I'm just going to go around our panelists, and if you just wrap things up quickly, and then we will say our good nights. I'm going to start with Ms. Johnson.
Good evening, and thank you. This was very, very informative, and I'm hoping that the community that is here listening really understands the behind the things that go on with the different agencies that are here, and even more agencies that are not represented here, how we want to come together to help the families that come through these doors, come through the prosecutor's office, come through Women Aware, come through legal services, and to know that we together, step by step, one by one, will help and try to make the victim survivor and their families come to a place of understanding and healing, knowing that we are working together for you and have built the relationships that we have and continue to build the relationships that we have, so that we can ease whatever struggles you may be having as a result of the crime that has occurred to you. And I really want to thank the panel that has come together here tonight. And I look forward to hopefully doing this again in the future. I think that if we can get the word out and for the community to understand the direct relationships that we have built over the years with the various agencies, how important it is and how we're here to help in any way that we can. So thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Solomons?
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I hope I was able to provide you with useful information. I would ask that you please remember, we will always respond to your calls for service anytime, day or night. So please don't hesitate to call us. If you have any concerns, call us and we will come.
Thank you. Ms. Youssef?
Thank you. So I want to say thank you again for allowing me to be part of this panel. Not only am I here to provide information, but I'm also gaining knowledge myself, like from listening to our different partners here. You know, there's always something new that I'm learning, and I benefit from this as well by hearing the different, even from Women Aware. There's so much that Mildred said today that I wasn't even aware that Women Aware is providing, you know, services. There's so much that's going on and is happening that it helps me be a better advocate to have these types of conversations and be part of these panels, so that I can tell my client, look, you can contact this person and be able to get this type of assistance. So this is beneficial for us as well, to learn from each other. So I really do appreciate it from that perspective. And then the last final comment I would like to make is, Mr. Kuberwright was saying, about the police not being perfect or, perfect human beings. But I also think it's important for us to remember that about our victims, our clients, the survivors that come to us. They're also not perfect human beings too. And sometimes they're being put on the stand, especially when I'm dealing with them in court, they're being put on the stand and they're being judged by judges, and other attorneys are cross-examining them and expecting everything to be perfect in their story or perfect in their testimony. And when dealing with these things that are happening, these are traumatic events. So we have to be more understanding and have, some compassion that they're not perfect human beings either. They're going to have made mistakes like the rest of us. And they should not be, dinged, for lack of a better word, for making those mistakes. Those mistakes should not work against them. And we should not accept or expect perfection from the victims that come to us and the clients that we're dealing with. And sometimes I feel like the system is expecting some level of perfection that just does not exist, and it's not fair.
Thank you. Ms. Torres?
Thank you so much for saying that. And you are correct about victims. And I think that all of us, that's part of our mission, is to let everyone know that we are here to advocate for the victim and to let everybody understand the barriers that the victims experience and to better understand them. And if they don't, we're the advocates and we will be there for them to educate those agencies that don't understand. And hopefully you'll be open-minded and continue to learn. I want to thank everyone for being here. I really had a wonderful time, and I also learned from each one of you, and I am proud to be part of this partnership. Women Aware will continue to be committed to assisting every victim of domestic violence that connects with us. Should you be listening to this panel, and please, if you're a victim of domestic violence and you need help, do not hesitate to contact us through our 24-hour hotline, which is 732-249-4504. We will be here for you and we will help you in every step of the way. Thank you all and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Mildred. Mr. Kuberwright, if you could finish up for us, please.
Just very quickly, I appreciate Ms. Youssef's insight. She can't be right on target, spot on. But I do think in that regard, there's some light at the end of the tunnel when we talk about body-worn cameras and them being in place in the coming months. I know that the governor has made $58 million available to local law enforcement to make that available to police officers to have that on, and maybe can, in fact, record these events contemporaneously. And if, in fact, the body-worn camera is authenticated and documented, Ms. Youssef's job and Ms. Torres' job might be a whole lot easier in the future. Although I do get the sense I'm going to be getting a lot more phone calls looking for body-worn cameras. And in that regard, I know there was some question regarding all the new legislation regarding marijuana. That probably is a webinar or presentation in and of itself, but there are quite a few resources in the chat. And if anyone is interested, you can look at it there and educate yourself in that regard. And I thank everyone for having me, and I thank everyone for being a team. And many times I go to meetings and I will lose my patience and talk about people say the words collaborator and partner and all of these words. And then when I call them that afternoon or the next day, they don't take my call. And that's not the same with this group. And we are true partners and true collaborators for a great group of people, that is victims and survivors. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, panelists. I appreciate everyone who tuned in to listen and learn tonight. And I wish you all a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.